Hi, my name is Rohan Jani. I'm a first year MPH student in Environmental Public Health Sciences. This subject is Global Environmental Health, and I'm going to discuss about radioactive incident in Goiania, Brazil. The objectives of this presentation include history and background, the health outcomes of this incident, legal matters and settlements, cleanup efforts and assessments, and finally, conclusion. Here is a timeline of this incident. In 1985, a private radiotherapy institute, the Instituto Goiano de Radioterapia in Goiânia, Brazil, moved to new premises, taking with it a cobalt-60 teletherapy unit and leaving in place a cesium-137 teletherapy unit without notifying the licensing authority as required under the terms of the institute's license. On September 10th to 13th, 1987, two friends looking for scraps to sell wander in this abandoned unit and steal the cesium-137 teletherapy unit, separating the radionuclear head, resulting in exposure. The capsule was punctured after a blue light was observed from an aperture. The man sold the items to a nearby scrapyard. The owner of the scrapyard was fascinated by the luminescence of the radioactive material. Not knowing what it was, called upon his close ones to take a look. Once he did that, all of the people involved in this incident started having nausea and vomiting and several other manifestations. The owner's wife noticed many people around them becoming severely ill at the same time. A visiting physician in Goiânia confirmed the presence of radiotoxicity and notified the health departments. The Department of Nuclear Installations was also notified, and severely ill patients were kept under isolation to prevent further exposure and transmission of the radioactive exposure. Here is a map showing the affected region. Goiânia is located from Rio de Janeiro at a distance of 1,348 kilometers and 919 kilometers from Sao Paulo. The reason we are mentioning this is because of the lack of facilities in Goiânia, and trained medical practitioners and staff had to be transported from these places to Goiânia in order to deal with the radioactive exposure that had occurred. Talking about the health outcomes of this incident, the contamination affected many areas of the city. Brazil, being a tropical country, experiences severe rainfall. To make things worse, there was a rainfall after the radionuclear head was separated that led to the propagation of transmission of the radioactive material to distant places, and thus involving a higher number of people who encountered the exposure. People who had the exposure suffered from different stages of acute radiation syndrome based upon the time since exposure. Within 48 hours, people were part of the prodromal phase in which they experienced nausea and vomiting. There was an incubation phase that lasted from 0 to 3 weeks depending upon different people, in which no particular symptoms were to be observed. After this, we have the onset phase, in which individuals with exposure can be encountered with dermal manifestations like bullous and raw areas, and hemopoietic disorders such as bleeding, infections, and so on. The convalescent phase usually led to death. Here is a linear bar graph that talks about the impact of the exposure. As we can see, a total number of 112,000 individuals were under surveillance. 259 people were exposed who had internal and external contamination, and there were a total number of 4 people who died out of this tragic incident. This line graph talks about the variation in 70-year committed dose from a single uptake of cesium-137 without the administration of Prussian blue, which was used as a mainstay of treatment with people who had radioactive exposure for decontamination. The line graph shows that the percentage of exposure remaining after 15 days was highest in an adult man and a woman. The outcome for the 46 exposed people are shown in the chart below. With a lower dose of less than 0.5 gyri, there is a large number of people who were exposed to this dose but were taken care of using only outpatient care. As the dose kept on increasing, we can see reduction in number of total people and a transition from outpatient to inpatient care. As the dose touches to 4 to 5 gyri, we can see deaths occurring. Here is a slide that shows the dermal manifestations of acute radiation injury. To the picture on your left, we can see a inflamed bulla that is black in color that on the dorsum of the hand. As this bulla increases in size, there is a point where it ruptures, causing a raw area on the dorsum of the hand. The picture on the right depicts the progression. Here is a slide that talks about the waste disposal. The slide on the left shows radioactive waste material being stored into drums. There were total number of 12,500 drums that were used in order to dispose of the contaminated materials that came in contact with the radiation. And the picture on the right shows concrete blocks. At least 6 concrete blocks were used after burial of the radioactive material in order to prevent further exposure. What do we conclude from this presentation? Lack of implementations of regulations led to improper disposal of hazardous radioactive material, which resulted in numerous people getting exposed to high levels of radiation, which had deleterious health impacts. Many suffered acute radioactive sickness and long-term health complications, including hematological outcomes. These were not limited to the people themselves, but also transferred to their progeny. There should be standard operating procedures for incidents like these, such as handling and disposal of hazardous waste material, which are crucial to prevent such incidents and further transmission. Public health education remains utmost important, and awareness about these incidents play a critical part in preventing similar incidents in the future. Here is a list of the references. Thank you for your time to go over this presentation.